자, 영어 원서 읽기 500번 읽기 도전. 원래는 음원만 듣고 하기로 했는데 오늘 제가 앞서 몇 번 시도를 했는데 오늘 컨디션이 안 좋은지 자꾸 중간에서 놓쳐서 이건 아직 제가 덜 익숙해져 있다라는 증거인 것 같아 가지고요. 책을 보면서 음원을 들으면서 한 번 더 읽고 다음 18번째 읽기에서 오롯이 음원만 따라 읽는 걸로 하겠습니다. 이번에 사실 이제 음원을 듣고 읽으면서 하나도 놓치지 않으려는 각오로 했는데 자꾸 중간에 놓치고 있어요. 그래서 책을 보면서 읽는 걸로 이번에는 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. 10번을 넘어서면서부터는 사실은 이제 근자감이라고 하는 근거 없는 자신감이 좀 생겨요. 그래서 다 할 수 있을 것 같은데 생각보다 조금 놓치는 부분들도 있고 소소하고 디테일한 부분에서 정확한 구사를 자꾸 생각하다 보니까 저도 모르게 놓치고 있습니다. 자, 그걸 완전히 확보하기 위해서 책을 보면서 다시 한번 읽도록 하겠습니다. 버니큘라 500번 읽기 도전 16번째 읽기 17번째 읽기입니다. 자, 음원과 함께 책을 준비한 상태에서 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. 버니큘라 Chapter 1 전에 Editor's Note 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. The book you are about to hear was brought to my attention in a most unusual way. One Friday afternoon, just before closing time, I heard a scratching sound at the front door of my office. When I opened the door, there before me stood a sad-eyed, droopy-eared dog carrying a large plain envelope in his mouth. He dropped it at my feet, gave me a soulful glance, and with a great quiet dignity sauntered away. Inside the envelope was the manuscript of the book, together with this letter. Gentlemen, the enclosed story is true. It happened in this very town to me and the family with whom I reside. I have changed the names of the family in order to protect them, but in all other respects, everything you will hear is a factual. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Harold. I came to writing purely by chance. My full-time occupation is dog. I live with Mr. and Mrs. X, called here the Monroes, and their two sons, Toby, aged 8, and Pete, aged 10. Also sharing our home is a cat named Chester, whom I am pleased to call my friend. We were a typical American family, and still are, though the events related in my story have, of course, had their effect on our lives. I hope you will find this tale of sufficient interest to yourself and your readers to warrant its publication. Sincerely, Harold X. Bunicular. Chapter 1 The Arrival. I shall never forget the first time I laid these now tired old eyes on our visitor. I had been left at home by the family with the admonition to take care of the house until they returned. That's something they always say to me when they go out. Take care of the house, Harold. You are the watchdog. I think it's their way of making up for not taking me with them, as if I wanted to go anyway. You can't lie down at the movies and still see the screen. And the people think you are being impolite if you fall asleep and start to snore, or stretch yourself in public. No, thank you. I'd rather be stretched out on my favorite rug in front of a nice whistling radiator. But I digress. I was talking about that first night. Well, it was cold. The rain was pelting the windows. The wind was howling, and it felt pretty good to be indoors. I was lying on the rug with my head on my paws, just staring absently at the front door. My friend Chatter was curled up on the brown velvet armchair, which years ago he'd staked out as his own. I saw that once again. He'd covered the whole set with his cat hair, and I chuckled to myself, picturing the scene tomorrow. Next to grasshoppers, there is nothing that frightens Chesters more than the vacuum cleaner. In the midst of the reverie, I heard the car pull into the driveway. I didn't even bother to get up and see who it was. I knew it had to be my family, the Murnaus, since it was just about time for the movie to be over. After a moment, the front door flew open. There they stood in the doorway, Toby and Pete and Mom and Dad Murnau. There was a flash of lightning, and in its glare, I noticed that Mr. Murnau was carrying a little bundle. A bundle with tiny, glistening eyes. Pete and Toby bounded into the room, both talking about the top of their lungs. Toby shouted, Put him over here, Dad. Take your boots off, you're soaking wet, replied his mother. Somewhat calmly, I thought, under the circumstances. But Mom, what about first stop dripping on the carpet? Would somebody like to take this? Asked Mr. Murnau, indicating the bundle with the eyes. I'd like to remove my coat. I will, Pete yelled. No, I will, said Toby. I found him. You will drop him. I will not. You will too. Mom, Pete punched me. I will take him, said Mrs. Murnau. Take off your coat this minute. But she became so involved in helping the boys out there of their coats that she didn't take him at all. My tranquil evening had been destroyed, and no one had even said hello to me. I whimpered to remind them that I was there. Harold, cried Toby, guess what happened to me? And then all over again, everyone started talking at once. At this point, I feel like I have to explain something. At this point, I feel I must explain something. In our family, everyone treats everyone else with a greater respect for his or her intelligence. That goes for the animals as well as the people. Everything that happens to them is explained to us. It's never been just a goodbye, Harold, or use the little box chatter at our house. Oh no. With us, it's a hey, Harold, Dad got a raise and now we are in a higher tax bracket. Or come sit on the bed, chatter, and watch this Wild Kingdom show. Maybe you will see a relative, which shows just how thoughtful they are. But after all, Mr. Mullen is a college professor and Mrs. Monroe is a lawyer. So we think of it as a rather special household, and we are therefore rather special pets. So it wasn't at all surprising to me that they took the time to explain the strange circumstances surrounding the arrival of the little bundle with the glistening eyes now among us. It seems that they had arrived at the theater late, and rather than trip over the feet of the audience already seated, they decided to sit in the last row, which was empty. They tiptoed in and sat down very quietly, so they wouldn't disturb anyone. Suddenly, Toby, who did, he had sat on something. Mr. Murner told him to stop making a fuss and then move to another seat. But in an unusual display of independence, Toby said he wanted to see just what it was he had sat on. An usher came over to their row to shush them, and Mr. Murnau borrowed his flashlight. What they found on Toby's chair was a little blanket bundle that was now sitting on Mr. Murnau's lap. They now unwrapped the blanket, and there in the center was a tiny black and white rabbit, sitting in a shoebox filled with dirt. A piece of paper had been tied to his neck with a ribbon. There were words on the paper, but the Mullows were unable to decipher them because they were in a totally unfamiliar language. I moved closer for a better look. Now, most people might call me a mongrel, but I have some pretty fancy bloodline running through these veins, and the Russian wolfhound happens to be one of them. Because my family got around a lot, I was able to recognize the languages as an obscure dialect of the Carpathian mountain region. Roughly translated, it read, "Take good care of my baby." But I couldn't tell if it was a note from a bereaved mother or a piece of Romanian sheet music. The little guy was shivering from fear and cold. It was decided that Mr. Malone and the boys would make a house for him out of an old crate, and they had some heavy dirty wire mesh from the garage. For the night, the boys would make The boys would make a bed for him in the shoebox. Toby and Peter ran outside to find the crate, and Mrs. Muller went to the kitchen to get him some milk and lettuce. Mr. Muller sat down, a dazed expression in his eyes, as if he were wondering how he became to sitting in his own living room in a wet raincoat with a strange bunny on his lap. I signaled to Chatter, and the two of us casually moseyed over to a corner of the room. We looked at each other. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. "I don't think the rabbits like milk," he answered. Chester and I were unable to continue our conversation because a deafening crash commanded our attention. Pete yelled from the hallway, "Ma, Toby broke the rabbit's house. I didn't, I just dropped it. People want to let me carry it. It's too big, Toby's too little. I'm not. You are too." "Okay, fellas," Mrs. Murdoch called out as she entered with the milk and lettuce. "Let's try to get it in here with as little hysteria as possible, please." Chester turned to me and said under his breath, "That lettuce looks repulsive, but if there's any milk left, I get it. I certainly wasn't going to argue with him. I'm a waterman myself." At that moment, the crate arrived, Barry standing the strain of being pulled in two directions at once. "Ma, Toby says he's going to keep the rabbit in his room. That's not fair. Harold sleeps in his room. Only sometimes I thought that when I know he's got a leftover ham sandwich in his drawer. Toby's a nice kid, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't hurt that he shared his stash with me." It was, after all, one of these late-night parties in Toby's room that I first developed my taste for chocolate cake. And Toby, noting my preference, has kept me in chocolate cake ever since. Pete, on the other hand, doesn't believe in sharing, and the only time I tried to sleep on his bed, he rolled over on me and pinned me by my ears so that I couldn't move for the rest of the night. I had a cricket in my neck for days. "But he's mine," Toby said. "I found him." "You sat on him, you mean?" "I found him and he's sleeping in my room. You can keep Smelly Old Harold in your room and Chester too if you want to, but I'm gonna keep the rabbit in mine." Smelly Old Harold. I would have bitten his ankle, but I knew he hadn't changed his socks for a week. Smelly indeed. Mr. Munoz spoke up. "I think the best place for the rabbit is right here in the living room on that table by the window. It's a light there and he will get lots of fresh air." "Pete taller than I am," Toby cried. "He'll be able to see the rabbit better." "Too bad, Squirt." "Okay," said Mrs. Murnau through clenched teeth. "Let's put him to bed and make him comfortable, and then we can all get some sleep." "Why?" Peter asked. "I don't want to go to sleep." Mrs. Muller smiled a little too sweetly at Pete. "Look, Ma," said Toby. "He's not drinking his milk." Chester nudged me in the ribs. "Didn't I tell you?" he asked. "Excuse me while I make myself available." "Hey, Toby," said Toby. "We gotta name him." Can't that wait until tomorrow?" asked Mr. Monroe. The boys shouted in unison. "No, he has to have a name right now." I have to say I agreed with them. It took them 3 days to name me, and those were the 3 most anxious days of my life. I couldn't sleep at all, worrying that they were really going to call me Fluffy, as Mrs. Monroe had suggested. "Well, all right," sighed Mrs. Monroe. "What about, say, Bun Bun?" "Uh-oh, there she goes again," I thought. "Where does she get them?" "Yuck," we all said. "Well then, how about Fluffy?" she offered hopefully. Peter looked at his mother and smiled. "You never give up, do you, Ma?" Meanwhile, Chester, who had also been named Fluffy for a short time, was rubbing against Mrs. Muller's ankles and purring loudly. "No, Chester, not now," he said, pushing him aside. "He wants to help us name him, don't you, Chester?" Toby asked, as he scooped him up into his arms. Chester shot me a look. I could tell this was not what he had in mind. "Come on, Harold," Toby called. "You've got to help me with the name, too." I joined the family, and the serious thinking began. We all peeled into the box. It was the first time I had really seen him. "So, this is your rabbit," I thought. "He sort of looks like a Chester, only he's got longer ears and a shorter tail, and a motor in his nose." "Well," said Peter after a moment, "since we found them at the movie, why don't we call him Mr. Johnson?" There was a moment of silence. Who's Mr. Johnson? Asked Toby. The guy who owns the movie theater. Peter answered. No one seemed to like the idea. How about the prince? Said Mr. Monroe. Dad, said Toby, are you kidding? Well, I had a dog named the Prince once, he replied lamely. Prince, I thought. That's a silly name for a dog. We found him at a Dracula movie. Let's call him Dracula, Toby said. That's a stupid name, said Pete. No, it's not. And anyway, I found him, and so I should get to name him. Mom, you're not going to let him name him, aren't you? That's a favoritism, and I'll be traumatized if you do. Mrs. Monroe looked in wonder at Pete. Please, Mom, please, Dad, let's name him Dracula, cried Toby. Please, please, please. And with each please, he squeezed Cheddar a little harder. Mrs. Monroe picked up the bowl of milk and moved toward the kitchen. Cheddar followed her every movement with his eyes, which now seemed to be popping out of his head. When she reached the kitchen door, she turned back and said, Let's not have any more argument. We're compromised. He's a bunny, and we found him at a Dracula movie, so we'll call him Bunnicula. Bunnicula? That should make everybody happy, including me. What about me? Muttered Cheddar. I won't be happy until they put down that milk. Well, guys, is that okay with you? She asked. Toby and Peter looked at one another, and then at the rabbit. A smile grew on Toby's face. Yeah, Ma, I think that name is just right. Pete shrugged. It's okay, but I get to pet him. Okay, I'm gonna put the milk back in the fridge. Maybe he'll drink it tomorrow. What about Chester? Toby said, dropping the frantic cat to the floor. Maybe he would like it. Chester made a beeline for Mrs. Monroe and looked up at her plaintively. Oh, Chester doesn't want any more milk, do you, Chester? You've already had your milk today. She reached down, patted Miss Chester on his head, and walked into the kitchen. Chester didn't move. Okay, bedtime, said Mr. Monroe. Good night, Bunnicula, Toby said. Good night, Count Bunnicula, Peter said sarcastically, in what I took to be his attempt at a Transylvanian accent. I may be wrong, but I thought I saw a flicker of movement from the cage. Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. I licked Toby good night. Good night, smelly Harold. Good night, dumb Chester. I drooled on Pete's foot. Mom, Harold drooled on my foot. Good night, Pete, Mrs. Monroe said with great finality as she came back into the living room. And then more calmly, good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe went up the stairs together. You know, dear, Mr. Monroe said, that was very clever. Bunnicula. I could never have thought of a name like that. Oh, I don't know, Robert. She smiled as she put her arm through his. I think Prince is a lovely name, too. The room was quiet. Cheddar was still sitting by the closed kitchen door in a state of shock. Slowly he turned to me. I wish they had named him Fluffy, was all he said. Chapter 2. Music in the Night. I feel at this time there are a few things you should know about Chester. He's not your ordinary cat. But then I'm not your ordinary dog, since an ordinary dog wouldn't be writing the book, would he? Cheddar came into the house several years ago as a birthday gift for Mr. Monroe, along with 2 volumes of G.K. Chesterton, hence the name Cheddar, and the first edition of Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. As a result of this introduction to literature, and given the fact that Mr. Monroe is an English professor, Cheddar developed a taste of reading early in life. I, on the other hand, have developed a taste for books. I found Jonathan Livingston Seagull particularly delicious. From Chester's kittenhood on, Mr. Monroe has used him as a sounding board for all his student lectures. If Chester doesn't fall asleep when Mr. Monroe is talking, the lecture can be counted a success. Every night when the family is sleeping, Chester goes to the bookshelf, selects his midnight reading, and calls on his favorite chair. He especially likes mystery stories and tales of horror and supernatural. As a result, he has developed a very vivid imagination. I'm telling you this because I think it's important for you to know to know something of Chatter's background before I relate to you the story of the event following the arrival of Binocular into our home. Let me begin with that first night. It seems that after I went to sleep, Chatter, still stewing over the lost milk, settled down with his latest book and attempted to ignore the rumbling in his stomach. The room was dark and quiet. This did not prevent his reading, of course, since, as you know, cats can see in the dark. A shaft of moonlight fell across the rabbit cage and spilled onto the floor below. The wind and rain had stopped, and as Chatter read Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher, she became increasingly aware of the eerie stillness that had taken their place. As Chatter tells it, it suddenly felt compelled to look at the rabbit. I don't know what came over me, he said to me the next morning, but a cold chill ran down my spine. The little bunny had begun to move for the first time since he had been put in his cage. He lifted his tiny nose and inhaled deeply, as if gathering sustenance from the moonlight. He slicked his ears back close to his body, and for the first time, Chatter said, I noticed the peculiar marking on his forehead. What had seemed an ordinary black spot between his ears took on a strange V shape, which connected with the big black patch to cover his back and each side of his neck. It looked as if he was wearing a coat. No, more like a cape than a coat. Through the silence had drifted the strains of remote and exotic music. I could have sworn it was a gypsy violin, Chatter told me. I thought perhaps a caravan was passing by, so I ran to the window. I remembered my mother telling me something about the caravans when I was a puppy, but for the life of me, I couldn't remember what. What's a caravan? I asked, feeling a little stupid. A caravan is a band of gypsies traveling through the forest in their wagon, Chatter answered. Ah, yes. It was coming back to me now. Stationed wagon? No, covered wagons. The gypsies travel all through the land, setting up camps around the great bonfire, doing magical tricks, and sometimes if you cross their palms with a piece of silver, they'll tell you your fortune. You mean if I gave him a pork, they'd tell my fortune? I asked breathlessly. Chatter looked at me with disdain. Save your silverware, he said. It wasn't a caravan after all. I was disappointed. What was it? I asked. Chester explained that when he looked out the window, he saw Professor Micklewand, our next-door neighbor, playing the violin in his living room. He listened for a few moments to the haunting melody and sighed with relief. I've really got to stop reading these horror stories late at night, he thought. It's beginning to affect my mind. He yawned and turned to go back to his chair and get some sleep. As he turned, however, he was startled by what he saw. There in the moonlight, as the music filtered through the air, sat the bunny, his eyes intense and staring, and unearthly aura about them. Now this is the part you won't believe, Chatter said to me. But as I watched, his lips parted in a hideous smile, and where a lavish buck teeth should have been two little pointed fangs glistened. I wasn't sure what to make of Chatter's story, but the way he told it, it set my hair on end. Chapter 3. Some unusual goings on. The next few days passed uneventfully. I was very bored. Our new arrival slept all day, and the Chatter, whose curiosity had been aroused by the strange behavior of the rabbit that first night, had decided to stay awake every night to observe him. Therefore, he too spent most of his days sleeping, so I had no one to talk to. The evenings weren't much better. Toby and Pete, who used to play with me as soon as they got home from school, now ran immediately to that silly rabbit's cage to play with him. Or at least they'd tried to. But Nicola did not make the most energetic playmate. It took him quite a while to wake up each night, and then when he did awaken, he didn't do much except hop around the living room. He didn't play catch. He didn't fetch. He didn't roll over to get his tummy rubbed. I couldn't understand why they played with him at all. I expected it was because he was new and different. But I was confident that they would soon tire of him and come back to trusty old Harold. Finally, on the morning of the fourth day, I caught Chatter bleary-eyed over the water dish. He grumbled at me in a most unpleasant manner. You know, Chatter, you were never exactly charming in the morning, but lately you've become downright grumpy. Chatter growled in response. What are you doing this for anyway? What are you looking for? He's just a cute little bunny. Cute little bunny. Chatter was amazed at my character analysis. That's what you think. He's a danger to this household and everyone in it. Oh, Chatter, I said, with an indulgent smile. I think your reading has gone to your head. It's just because I do read that I knew what I'm talking about. Well, what are you talking about? I still don't understand. I'm not sure yet, but I know there's something funny about that rabbit. That's why I have to keep alert. But look at you, you're exhausted. You sleep all the time. How can you call that alert? I'm awake when it's important. He sleeps all day, so I sleep all day. So just what have you seen since the first night that makes you uneasy? Well, said Chester, that is... At this point, Chester started to bathe his tail, which is a cat's way of changing a subject he finds uncomfortable. He then stumbled sleepily into the living room. So I asked again, following him, what have you seen? Nothing, he snapped, and proceeded to curl up on his chair to go to sleep. After a moment, he opened one eye. But that doesn't mean there's nothing to see. For the next few mornings, it was the same routine. I'd be ready for a good romp around the living room, and Chester would go to sleep. Pete and Toby were at school. Mr. Monroe was at the university. He never did too much romping around anyway, and Mrs. Monroe was at her office. No one to play with the poor, neglected Harold. At first, I thought I could strike up a apprenticeship with Panicula and maybe teach him a few tricks, but I could never wake him up. He was always waking up just about sunset when I wanted to take a snooze. A rabbit, I concluded, is cute to look at, but is generally useless, especially as a companion to dogs. So I would retire each day with my favorite shoe to the rug and chew. Now, some people, especially Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, can't understand my taste for shoes and they yell at me for snacking on them. But I always say there's no accounting for taste. For instance, I remember one evening when Mr. Monroe picked some of his sour balls out of the bowl of his chair and dropped a green one on the floor. He didn't notice as it rolled across the room and landed near my nose. I decided this was a perfect opportunity to try one for myself. I placed it in my mouth and wished immediately that I hadn't. As the tears started running out of my eyes, I thought, what's wrong with my mouth? It's turning inside out. Mr. Monroe immediately noticed that something had happened. What's the matter, Harold? Are you looking for someone to kiss? Help! Help! I wanted to cry, but all that came out was an ooh sound. I oohed for days. So how can anyone who likes green sour balls criticize me for preparing a nice penny roper or a bedroom slipper? But back to the matter at hand. One morning, Chatter had news. That bunny, he whispered to me across our food bowls, got out of his cage last night. Don't be ridiculous, I said. How could he break through that wire? Look how little he is. That's just it. He didn't break through any wire. He got out of his cage without breaking anything or opening any doors. I looked puzzled. So Chatter told me the following stories. Now, Harold, he said, I don't want you taking I'm not a good watch cat, but after a few hours last night, I grew curious about the time. I went into the hallway, and you know that new clock they've got, the big one, that goes all the way to the ceiling? Well, see, it has these things in the middle called the pendulum. At first, I figured I would just leave it alone. I looked like the spool they tied on a string and hung from the doorknob for me to play with it when I was a kitten. Every time I hit the silly spool with my paw, it would swing back and hit me on the nose. I hated that toy. So naturally, when I saw this one, I decided not to have anything to do with it. I checked the time. It was midnight. I was all set to go back to the living room when something stopped me. Curiosity, I ventured. I suppose you could call it that. I prefer to think of it as the challenge of the unknown. I put one paw over my nose and reached out with the other one and gave it one good smack. I darn near broke my arm. It's still tender. See how swollen it is? He showed me his little paw. I couldn't see anything wrong, but I knew better than to argue with him. Oh, yes, I said, that looks terrible. You must be suffering awfully. You'd better go easy today. He limped dramatically, just far enough to display his new handicap, and continued. I couldn't even get to the pendulum. Somebody had put glass in front of it, and I was pretty mad. I was all set to go back, but at the same time, I couldn't help watching the thing move back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It was so easy to watch, and before I knew what had happened, I was waking up. You fell asleep? I asked incredulously. I couldn't help it. I didn't even know it had happened, but I looked up at the piece of the clock and it was 12:45. I'd been gone 45 minutes. I ran back into the living room, looked at Bunnicula's cage, and it was empty. I couldn't imagine where he was. Then I noticed a light coming from under the kitchen door. I went into the crouch, striking the light, when click. I heard the refrigerator door close and the light went out. It must have been Mr. Murnau having his midnight snack, I suggested. No, that's what I thought. I jumped on my chair, called real quick, and kept one eye open, pretending to be asleep. Slowly, the door to the kitchen squeaked open. This little head poked out from around the corner and looked to the other side to see if the coast was clear. Then guess who came bouncing out all by himself, and with that idiotic grin of his plastered all over his face. Well, I guess it wasn't Mr. Murnau, I said. Not unless he wears bunny pajamas and gets very tiny at night. Bunnicula, huh? You got it. Unfortunately, I hadn't positioned myself so that I could see him get back into the cage, and I didn't want to let him know that I had seen anything, so I had to stay put. I still don't know how he got out or back in. At this point, Mr. Murnau came downstairs to make breakfast. I wondered if Chattery hadn't dreamed the whole thing. He didn't admit he'd fallen asleep, and as I've said, he has quite an imagination, but I was game. After all, there hadn't been any excitement in this place for days. Chattery and I took our positions under the kitchen table. We didn't have long to wait. Holy cow, Mr. Murnau yelped as he opened the refrigerator door. He took this funny-looking white thing out of the fridge and held it at arm's length. Peter, come down here. What is that? I whispered. Beats me, Chattery answered. It looks like a white tomato. Very funny, I said, as Pete came into the kitchen. Peter, have you been playing with your chemistry set in here? No, Dad. Why? I thought this might be one of your experiments. Do you know what it is? Gee, Dad, it looks like a white tomato. Just then, Mr. Murnau and Toby came in the doors. What's all the fuss about? Mrs. Murnau asked. We were just trying to figure out what this is. Toby pulled it down so he could get a better look. Well, he said, it looks to me more like a white tomato. Mr. Murnau took a good long look. You know, he said to his wife, it really does look like a white tomato. This one way to find out? Mrs. Murnau, who always was the practical one, let's cut it open and see what's inside. Everybody gathered around the table. I jumped up on a chair, and in all the excitement, no one noticed that I had my paws on the table, which under normal circumstances was discouraged, to say the least. Chester wasn't so lucky. Cheddar, get off the table, Mrs. Murnau said. Cheddar jumped onto Toby's shoulders, where he stayed to view the proceedings. Mrs. Murnau took her sharpest knife and cut cleanly through the thing. It fell into two halves. It's a tomato all right, said Mrs. Murnau. Here are the seeds. But it's all white, Toby observed. And look, And look, said Pete, it's dry. So it is, Mr. Warner said, as he picked up one of the halves. There's no juice at all. Well, Anne, what do you think? It's gone bad, I guess, though I have never heard of a tomato turning white before. Come on, she said, clearing the table. Let's throw it out and have a breakfast. And Harold, get your paws off the table, rats. Cheddar jumped down from Toby's shoulders and motioned for me to follow him into the living room. This had better be important, I said. They're cooking bacon. A white tomato. Very significant, Cheddar murmured. So it's a white tomato, I said, edging my way back to the kitchen door. What does that have to do with the vernacular? I can tell you one thing, Cheddar said. I got a good look at the tomato. There were very suspicious marks on the skin. So? I believe they're teeth marks. So tonight I'm going to reread a book I read last year. How fascinating, I said, as the aroma of applying bacon wafted across my nostrils. And what book might that be? The Mark of the Vampire. What? I stopped dead in my tracks. Read me tonight after the others have gone to sleep. You'd better take a nap today so you can stay awake. Chester closed his eyes. I shifted my look to Penicula, who seemed to be asleep in his cage. A tiny smile sat upon his lips. A happy dream, I wondered, or something else. My reverie was broken by the sound of crunching bacon. I was in the kitchen in a flash.